12 months of hype, 3 host nations, and 1 massive political storm cloud. That is the backdrop as the round of 16 finally kicks off at the 2026 World Cup. And for the first time in tournament history, every single matchup is locked, loaded, and ready to go. All 8 of these knockout ties are now confirmed after the final 3 round of 32 matches wrapped up on Friday, July the 3rd. Argentina survived a wild 3-2 extra time battle against tiny Cape Verde. Egypt knocked out Australia on penalties 4-2 after a 1-1 draw, and Colombia edged past Ghana 1-0 in Kansas City. That means the entire bracket all the way to the July 19th final is now set in stone, and the round of 16 itself runs from Saturday, July 4th, through Tuesday, July 7th, spread across 8 stadiums in 3 different countries. This tournament already made history as the first ever 48-team World Cup, and that expansion is exactly why we are only reaching the knockout rounds now instead of weeks earlier like in past editions. FIFA added an entirely new opening knockout round specifically to accommodate the extra 16 teams, which pushed the whole schedule back and is now producing storylines, giant killers, host nations under the microscope, superstar collisions, a full round earlier than fans are used to seeing them. But this World Cup has never really been just about football, and this round is no exception. Behind every kickoff this week sits a genuinely tense political backdrop that has followed this tournament since the draw last December. Human rights organizations, fan groups, and even members of the European Parliament have spent months raising alarms about immigration enforcement, ticket prices, and whether the so-called celebration of global soccer is actually delivering on that promise for the millions of visitors trying to attend. Let's start with the politics, because it is impossible to separate from what is happening on the pitch this week. Since President Trump's second term began, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has ramped up operations dramatically, and according to Human Rights Watch, ICE arrested well over 160,000 people across the municipal areas, covering the 11 U.S. host cities between January of last year and March of this year alone. More than 20 American supporter groups working alongside the American Civil Liberties Union issued a formal travel advisory warning visiting fans about what they called rising authoritarianism and serious risks to immigrant communities, racial and ethnic minorities, and LGBTQ+ travelers. Some European fan groups, including a prominent English supporters organization, have gone as far as saying they will keep a low profile at matches inside the United States specifically because of concerns over civil liberties. On top of that, an expanded travel ban imposed by the administration has blocked citizens from a dozen countries and added restrictions on travelers from several more, directly affecting 2 nations that qualified for this tournament, Iran and Haiti. Exceptions exist for the athletes, coaches, and essential staff of qualified teams, but ordinary fans from those countries are simply locked out, cutting off a meaningful slice of the tournament's international audience. Iran's Football Federation has already said as much, even skipping the official draw ceremony in Washington after members of its delegation were denied visas. Then there is the money side of the story, which has arguably generated just as much backlash as the immigration issue. FIFA has employed dynamic pricing for the first time ever at a World Cup, and ticket costs for the July 19th final at MetLife Stadium have been reported as high as $32,970 for premium seating, nearly triple what the same category cost only months earlier. On FIFA's own resale marketplace, a single Category 3 seat for the final was spotted listed at roughly $143,000, more than 40 times its original face value. Fan advocacy groups in Europe formally complained to the European Commission, accusing FIFA of abusing a monopoly position, and some supporters say the increase compared to previous tournaments runs well over 200%. All 3 co-host nations, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, are still alive in the competition simultaneously for the first time in World Cup history, which raises the stakes even further. Some analysts have floated the idea, still very much speculation at this stage, that an early exit by any of the 3 hosts could dent ticket demand and atmosphere for the remaining rounds. given how heavily the tournament's marketing has leaned on all three co-hosts making a deep, celebratory run together. With all of that swirling in the background, here is exactly how the football itself is shaping up, match by match, across 4 days of knockout drama. Saturday's opener sends Canada up against Morocco in Houston, and this one genuinely matters for the co-hosts. Canada reached this stage by beating South Africa in the tournament's very first knockout match, giving the home fans an early reason to believe. Morocco, on the other hand, needed a penalty shootout just to get past the Netherlands, and they have quietly built a reputation as one of the most disciplined defensive units left in the entire competition. Given Morocco's semi-final run back in 2022, nobody in this bracket wants to face them, and Canadian supporters know it. Later that same Saturday, Paraguay takes on France in Philadelphia in what might be the single most lopsided matchup on paper across the whole round. Paraguay pulled off arguably the biggest shock of the round of 32, eliminating Germany on penalties, while France steamrolled Sweden 3-0 and looked like one of the most complete squads remaining in the tournament. This is precisely the kind of David versus Goliath tie the expanded 48-team format was designed to create, and neutral fans everywhere are circling it as the round's classic underdog story. Sunday brings two enormous matchups of its own. First, Brazil faces Norway at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, a genuine box office clash between Brazil's dazzling attacking talent and a Norwegian side built almost entirely around Erling Haaland, who scored a dramatic late winner just to drag his team into this round. Later that day, host nation Mexico takes on England inside a newly renovated Estadio Azteca, one of the most historic grounds in World Cup history. That atmosphere alone should be worth watching regardless of the scoreline. Though Mexican organizers have also had to manage separate concerns this year after reports of cartel-related violence near Guadalajara following the death of a notorious drug trafficking figure, adding an extra layer of tension to hosting duties south of the border. Monday shifts the spotlight to two ties many are calling the emotional heart of this entire round. Portugal meets Spain in Dallas, and honestly, this might be the standout matchup of the whole knockout stage so far. Spain dismantled Austria 3-0 to get here, while Portugal survived a wildly controversial extra-time win over Croatia that was ultimately decided by a VAR review in the 103rd minute. Two of Europe's most talented rosters, both playing some of their best football of the tournament, are meeting far earlier than anyone expected back at the December draw. For Cristiano Ronaldo, still competing at 41 years old, a win here would set up exactly the kind of statement result that could define how this entire tournament is remembered for Portugal. And pundits across Europe have already started speculating about whether this could realistically be his final World Cup appearance. Later Monday, the United States takes on Belgium in Seattle, arguably the toughest test yet for the American co-hosts. Belgium needed extra time just to come back from 2 goals down against Senegal, proving they can grind out results even when things go badly wrong, while the U.S. has looked composed and organized through its first 2 knockout matches. This fixture carries extra weight, given everything happening off the pitch domestically. American supporter groups have spent months publicly wrestling with how to balance national pride in hosting duties against discomfort over the immigration enforcement climate surrounding the tournament, and some fan advocacy organizations have specifically called on FIFA to push for what they are calling an ice truce, a temporary halt to enforcement operations near World Cup venues and fan zones for the duration of the competition. FIFA has not agreed to any such measure publicly as of this week. Tuesday closes out the round with the 2 ties that were only decided last night. In Atlanta, Argentina now faces Egypt after both survived dramatic finishes on Friday. Argentina needed extra time and an own goal off Cape Verde defender Dini Borges to escape with a 3-2 win, with Lionel Messi scoring yet another goal to extend his own tournament scoring record along the way. Cape Verde, the smallest nation ever to reach a World Cup knockout stage, ultimately saw its remarkable fairy tale run end just one win short of a date with Argentina in this very round. Egypt, meanwhile, made history of its own by advancing past the knockout stage for the first time ever, beating Australia 4-2 on penalties after a 1-1 draw that included a bicycle kick-style equalizer late in normal time. For Messi, now competing deep into his final realistic shot at a second World Cup title, every match from here only gets harder, and Egypt's disciplined physical style could make Atlanta a genuinely uncomfortable night for the defending champions. The same day in Vancouver, Switzerland, who cruised past Algeria 2-0 in the previous round, will face Colombia after John Arias scored the only goal in a tight 1-0 win over Ghana in Kansas City. Colombia's win secured the very last spot in this bracket, and their attacking depth through the group stage makes them a live threat against a Swiss side that has looked efficient but not spectacular so far. Looking just one round ahead, the quarterfinal picture is already partly visible. The winners of Paraguay, France, and Canada, Morocco will meet in Boston on July 9th. The winners of Spain, Portugal, and USA, Belgium collide in Los Angeles on July 10th. Brazil, Norway's winner faces Mexico, England's winner in Miami on July 11th, and whoever survives the Argentina, Egypt, and Switzerland, Colombia ties meets in Kansas City that same day. From there, the semifinals land on July 14th and 15th before the tournament returns to MetLife Stadium in New Jersey for the final on July 19th. Zoom out and this round captures something genuinely unprecedented about the 2026 World Cup. Never before has a single knockout round featured this concentration of superstar duels, historic underdog runs, and outright political controversy happening all at once and this early in the competition. Supporters chasing their teams across this stretch could realistically bounce between Houston, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Mexico City, Dallas, Seattle, Atlanta, and Vancouver within a single week. 8 cities across, 3 countries hosting knockout football in one continuous stretch, something no previous World Cup has ever demanded of its traveling fans. And something that becomes considerably more complicated given the visa and enforcement concerns already outlined by human rights groups. For the players, the pressure has rarely felt higher. Messi is chasing what may be his last real opportunity to add a second World Cup title to his legacy, and Ronaldo, at 41, is trying to write one final chapter with Portugal before time finally catches up to him. For the 3 co-host nations, staying alive together is both a point of national pride and, according to some tournament analysts, an economic necessity given how much of the broadcast and sponsorship marketing has leaned on the story of Canada, Mexico, and the United States advancing deep into the tournament as a shared narrative. And for millions of fans simply trying to watch their countries compete, this round of 16 has become something bigger than a soccer bracket. It sits at the exact intersection of sport, immigration policy, and corporate ticket pricing that has defined this entire World Cup cycle since the draw was first held in Washington back in December. Whether Cape Verde's underdog magic, Ronaldo's late career defiance, or the growing chorus of political criticism ends up defining how this tournament is remembered may not be clear until the final whistle blows in New Jersey on July 19th. There's also a deeper historical layer to why this bracket looks the way it does, and it is worth walking through because it explains why fans are calling this the most unpredictable knockout round in tournament history. When FIFA expanded the World Cup from 32 nations to 48, critics warned that diluting the field would produce lopsided, boring group stages. Instead, the opposite has happened. Smaller federations like Cape Verde and Egypt used the extra qualifying spots to break through for the very first time, and both nations turned that opportunity into deep, credible knockout runs rather than early exits. Cape Verde, a nation of roughly 500,000 people, became the smallest country ever to reach a World Cup knockout match, and their journey through the group stage and into the round of 32 turned them into arguably the most talked about underdog story of the entire tournament, before Argentina finally ended the run in extra time on Friday night. Egypt's story carries its own weight too. Despite producing some of the continent's greatest individual talents over the decades, the Pharaohs had never once advanced past a World Cup group stage before this year. Beating Australia on penalties changes that history permanently, regardless of what happens against Argentina in Atlanta. And Egyptian football officials have already described the achievement as a turning point for the sport domestically, one that could reshape investment and youth development programs for years to come. Back on the political front, the tension between celebration and controversy keeps resurfacing in different forms almost every week of this tournament. Reporting from earlier this year detailed how, even at the official World Cup draw ceremony held at the Kennedy Center in Washington, the shadow of immigration policy hung over the room. Several members of Iran's Football Federation delegation were denied visas ahead of the event, prompting Iranian officials to skip the ceremony entirely in protest. FIFA President Gianni Infantino, who has repeatedly promised that the tournament would welcome visitors from every corner of the globe, found himself publicly defending the administration's approach, while simultaneously trying to reassure fans that visa processing for ticket holders would be expedited. That tension between FIFA's promotional message and the lived reality for many international travelers has become one of the defining storylines of the entire event, arguably as consistent a thread running through this World Cup as any single team's form on the pitch. Independent monitoring groups have continued tracking the human cost of enforcement operations throughout the tournament window. According to figures compiled by Human Rights Watch, at least 19 people died in immigration detention during 2026 alone, and federal agents have been linked to the deaths of 2 American citizens during protest-related incidents, according to the same reporting. These numbers have fueled continued calls from civil society organizations for what advocacy groups are branding a World Cup ice truce, essentially asking the federal government to voluntarily pause enforcement activity in and around host stadiums, fan zones, and public transit routes used by ticket holders for the remainder of the tournament. So far, no formal commitment of that kind has been issued by the administration, and FIFA itself has stopped short of directly pressuring Washington on the issue in public statements, instead focusing its messaging on operational logistics, like transportation and stadium security. The ticket pricing saga, meanwhile, has taken on a life of its own well beyond typical World Cup grumbling about costs. Football Supporters Europe, working alongside the consumer advocacy group Euroconsumers, filed a formal complaint with the European Commission back in the spring, accusing FIFA of what they called a monumental betrayal of ordinary fans through aggressive dynamic pricing and pressure-selling tactics. FIFA did respond to some of the initial backlash by introducing a limited allotment of $60 tickets for every round through the final, reserved specifically for each qualifying nation's most loyal traveling supporters. But that discounted allocation reportedly covers only about 10% of a team's total ticket allowance per match, leaving the vast majority of seats subject to the same surge pricing that has already pushed some final tickets into six-figure territory on the resale market. Even members of the United States Congress have weighed in publicly on the pricing controversy, with several lawmakers sending letters to FIFA questioning whether dynamic pricing violates the spirit of a tournament that receives substantial public infrastructure and security investment from host cities and states. Despite all of this noise off the pitch, attendance and viewership figures suggest the football itself is still resonating powerfully with a global audience. FIFA reported that nearly 2 million tickets sold within just the first 2 sales phases, with demand outstripping supply by more than 30 times in some match categories, according to reporting from earlier this year. That level of demand, even amid public complaints about pricing and safety concerns, underscores just how much cultural gravity the World Cup still carries, politics and all. Turning back to the bracket itself, a few tactical storylines deserve extra attention heading into the week. Morocco's run to this stage has been built almost entirely on defensive discipline, conceding remarkably few clear chances across their first 2 knockout matches, and their coaching staff has leaned heavily on the same low-block, rapid transition approach that carried the nation to a historic semi-final appearance back in 2022. Canada, by contrast, has looked more expansive and confident at home, feeding off supportive crowds in Toronto and Vancouver earlier in the tournament before shifting south to Houston for this particular fixture. Canadian manager press conferences this week have repeatedly emphasized composure over emotion, a clear attempt to keep the co-host squad from getting overwhelmed by the occasion against a tactically mature Moroccan side. On the France side of the bracket, questions have started to swirl about squad fatigue after a demanding qualifying and group stage campaign, even though the 3-0 win over Sweden looked comfortable on the scoreline. French sports media have floated the idea that several key attacking players could be rotated against Paraguay to manage minutes ahead of a potentially grueling run toward the final, though the French Federation has not confirmed any lineup changes publicly. Paraguay, meanwhile, has embraced its underdog status fully, with several players giving interviews this week, describing the Germany upset as validation for a golden generation that has quietly been building for years in South American qualifying. The Brazil-Norway matchup carries its own layer of intrigue beyond the obvious Haaland storyline. Brazilian media have spent the week debating whether the squad's attacking talent can be organized well enough defensively to contain a Norwegian side that has increasingly built its entire tactical identity around delivering service into dangerous areas for its captain. Haaland's tournament has already been remarkable by any measure, and a big performance against Brazil on the sport's biggest stage would only add to a growing narrative that this may be the breakout World Cup that cements his status among the very best strikers of his generation. Mexico's tie against England inside Estadio Azteca adds yet another dimension. Given the stadium's status as the first venue ever to host World Cup finals matches across 3 different tournaments once this edition concludes, Mexican Federation officials have described hosting a knockout match at the newly renovated stadium as a full-circle moment for the country's footballing history, even as security officials have had to navigate the aftermath of cartel violence reported near Guadalajara in the weeks leading up to the tournament. England, for its part, arrives with a squad many pundits consider among the most talented in the country's history, though the pressure of ending a decades-long wait for major silverware continues to follow every match the team plays on foreign soil. Taken together, this round of 16 represents something the sport has genuinely never seen before, a knockout stage, this heavy with superstar collisions, historic underdog stories, and geopolitical controversy, all compressed into a single 4-day window spread across 8 cities in 3 countries. Whatever happens on the pitch between now and Tuesday night in Vancouver, this stretch of the 2026 World Cup already looks destined to be remembered as one of the most dramatic and complicated rounds in the tournament's long history.